You've mentioned something that I think is so significant that we talk a lot here at Faithful and True about, and that is the importance of an internal motivator, that I'm internally motivated to do this. I'm not doing it just to appease someone or to appear in a particular way or to get a good grade, but I'm really doing it because I want to be transformed. And again, that's the desire piece. So I think what can happen is early on, we are motivated externally. Somebody else thinks I should do this, or this is important to my wife, or my wife is hurt and angry, and I don't want her to be hurt and angry, and I'm going to do this to kind of appease her. Well, what we know is that's not a sustainable motivator. It's only when it becomes my desire. That's when I can do it for the long haul.
Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We're happy to be here today with our regular host, Dr. Greg Miller. Greg, how are you?
I'm doing well.
Well, we've had so many requests for a return appearance by Faithful and True's own Rebecca, and we thought that today would be a good day to do that.
Well, great. I'm glad to be here. Sure.
Well, we're happy to have you with us. Today we have an interesting subject today that I think came to us through some questions from some of the individuals that are in your groups. Right?
Yep, that's right. Yep.
And they were saying, asking you, is there some clear reason why some men do well and make it through and some couples don't?
Right. Yeah. So this is another one of those questions that I had kind of polled the crowd in my groups a little while back. And there was, broad ranges of questions, but this was one that sort of comes up. At the women's workshop, Debbie talks sometimes about how, it's our difference or our similarities that bring us together in our groups. And it's our differences that sometimes create a lot of the struggle for us in our groups. It's just a general area I often help women with a little bit is, why am I different from the other women in my group? I'm older, I'm younger, I don't have kids, or I'm a stay-at-home parent, or my story's too big, my story's too small. Right. And one of the things that Debbie says in that quote sort of is, our similarities bring us together, but our differences help us grow. And that's one of the things that I often help women with. But one of the other questions that sort of comes up sometimes is this awareness that perhaps some of the women are experiencing a lot of change and growth in their relationship, and it feels like we're getting somewhere. And then for some women, there's a sense like we're not moving quite so much. And so then this question comes sort of out of that tension is really, why do some men make it and others don't? Why does it feel like I can see other group members, their husbands seem to be getting it. He seems to be
in a better place.
In a better place. Yeah, he seems to, I don't know, I think of it chugging on all cylinders. We're going someplace. And it can feel like a place of a lot of despair for wives where I see this happening in some of my group members. And for us, it feels like we're not making it. Yeah.
Right.
And so that would be a question.
Yeah.
For you.
So why do some men make it and some men don't?
Yeah.
So the answer is, I don't know.
Yeah.
Join us again next week.
But what we can talk about are some of the contributing factors, some of the pieces that come together.
Yeah.
And I do think one of the images that I use is that men come to our workshop, and while they are at the workshop, we cast this vision of like building this house of recovery. And, we try to lay out what it's going to look like and how you're going to build the house and what's needed to build the house. What also is true, though, not everybody's property that they inherit is ready to have a house built on it yet. Some men inherit this property that is great. I mean, it's got great drainage. There's no real challenges. It's ready to build the house. But what's true is some men, because of their histories, their stories, their chaos, their trauma, The house that they, or the land that they inherit really is challenging. It's too rocky, or the drainage is bad, or it's swampy, or there's this pre-work that has to be done before we really start to experience the transformation of building the house. And so what could be true in the early days is that some men get discouraged before they're able to even start building the house because the pre-work that they need to do feels overwhelming. And it's not a glamorous thing, working on drainage or removing the big rocks or having to remove stumps. But for some men, that is essential, that needs to be done and done well in order to build the house eventually. So I think the first aspect, the first thing to look at is just the nature of the work itself. And what is true is for the man who has more significant trauma and chaos, or has a significant amount of complexity in his family system, it's just going to be a more challenging beginning process as he gets his land ready to build that house of recovery. So that's one of the factors.
And so, maybe this is where you're going a little bit, but like, what would an example be of like working on drainage or getting the land ready?
I would say some of it would be something as simple as being honest and open and kind of living into the truth of what my family system was growing up. What we know is denial, minimizing, the rationalizing, that keeps me stuck. And, I often said at the workshop, all truth sets us free. Even painful truth, even truth with consequences sets us free. And so the quicker a man can just embrace his own reality, and that in itself can be a process. One of the strongest and at times best coping strategies that we had as children was minimizing. And so for some men, they've minimized what they experienced growing up. They minimized the dynamics of their family. And what's interesting is for many wives, I imagine what's so frustrating is what they see seems so obvious.
Yeah.
They've interacted with the in-laws. They have seen some of the family dynamics, and they have heard their husband's story. And so for many of them, they even can get frustrated because they still see their husband in this minimizing or actually denying their family system or story. But the quicker a man can just be in the truth, and for all of us, it's still a process, but the more open a man is, the quicker the man gets there. That's kind of the example of some of the pre-work that has to be done. And again, I want to say it, that minimizing is one of the strategies that children have, and without it, we wouldn't survive. That child that tells themselves it's not that bad, and it becomes even more complicated if one of the parents was telling him it wasn't that bad. Those are old messages that aren't easy to walk away from. We work with a lot of men, and kind of their leading statement is, I come from a good family. I don't know why I'm here. And what I want men to understand is the andness of their family. We can come from a good family, and there can be a lot of hurt, pain, dysfunction, chaos, and in some cases, pretty significant trauma. So kind of living into the truth. The sooner a man can start to embrace his truth, the more he's going to experience that freedom.
Well, I think of it always, too, something I talk with the wives about is, I always say the phrase like wise eyes to see what is, and to be able to really see what is, instead of sort of the story I needed to believe for a long time. And I think that is often a real point of connection for a lot of the wives' work too, is like I needed to not see for a period of time. I needed that. That was a good and adaptive skill that I had. And it's hard, I think, for all of us when we bump up against other people's stories, and we see how that's no longer serving us, and we might be dealing with implications of that. But it is such a valuable skill that we have as little kids.
Well, and you even mentioned this. It is our nature to compare. To see whose story is the worst, whose story is the best, whose husband's done the most things, the least things, And so actually comparison is another strategy to create safety. I want to know where I fit in the hierarchy. Well, if my strategy is comparison, I can always find a story that's worse than mine. I can always find that tragedy's that greater than mine. And so for a lot of men, they have been minimizing because they compare their story to a more horrific story, And then they can tell themselves, well, it wasn't that bad. I didn't have it that bad.
Yeah.
And so getting out of that comparison, I love the way that you said it. Whatever's true is true. Whatever is mine is mine.
Yeah.
And it doesn't serve me to compare it to anybody else. It's just helpful for me to kind of live into the reality of that. So, I think one of the things that is a factor in determining how someone does is how quickly they are open to the truth of their own experiences. And along with that and their own choices. Meaning we have a tendency to minimize the impact of what we've done, the consequences of what we've done. And again, minimizing is a strategy to avoid our shame or our grief or our pain. And so until I'm really able to live in the truth of what I've done and the people that I've hurt through my acting out, it's going to be difficult for me to get some traction. And just what's true is we have to live into that. And for some men, it just takes longer. Ironically, the more shame a man has, the less open he is, or the more resistance he has to moving to the truth.
Yeah.
Because that truth is too painful, it's too chaotic. One of the things that we know is that shame is one of the worst motivators for recovery. I often say you cannot shame your way into recovery. And so for that man to deal with the shame, and the way we talk about shame are the lies I believe about myself and I believe about God. So I have to confront the lies of shame with truth. And like I just said, even painful truth, even truth with consequences still sets me free. And so getting clear about what is my motivation, am I trying to shame my way into recovery or guilt my way into recovery? None of that's going to work. And what I believe from a theological perspective, it's that invitation to recovery. And I use the language of conviction. Conviction is an invitation from God to a new way of living. And so when I hear that invitation, then that moves me into that better motivation that is long-term. One of the things that we see is early on, most men have some level of desperation. Desperation for most of them is the initial motivator. They got caught, they got exposed, they had the courage to share something with their spouse, and so now they have this level of desperation. But what we know is if desperation is all they have, it will not result in long-term recovery. Because it doesn't matter how much desperation I have, at some point it will fade. So I have to be willing to move from desperation to desire. And once I desire it, I will pursue it. I don't think it's an accident that in the story of Jesus encountering the paralytic at the pool of Bethesda, the question is, do you want to get well?
Yeah.
Because Jesus understood what we desire, we pursue. So I think that's another kind of factor in determining why some people make it. Are they able to make that transition from desperation to desire? And my sense is a lot of women intuitively know that desperation may be the initial rocket booster, but it's not going to be enough for the long-term journey.
Yeah.
And that's why for some of them, they're really hesitant to offer any hope to their spouse because they're afraid it will diminish the desperation and they don't have confidence yet that there's desire.
Well, and they have that sense that the desperation, I think, is doing something.
Right.
It's productive. It's moving something. And so you're exactly right. It feels better than not having desperation.
And I
so,
would say desperation initially is not a bad motivator.
Yeah.
It just cannot be the long-term strategy.
Yeah.
And again, it's our nature. We adapt, we acclimate. And so what once was creating desperation for us, and what can be true is for many men, when things start feeling better, when maybe my wife isn't as reactionary, the consequences aren't as great. I'm starting to find some normalcy in this new circumstance, then some of that desperation ends. And I use the image of it's like taking an antibiotic. We all know from the doctor that if they give you an antibiotic, you take the full dose because if you don't, you start building resistance. Same thing happens in recovery. I engage recovery, I'm doing recovery, but things start to feel better. I don't follow through. And then eventually it will come back because I never really address the infection that's driving the disease or the fever.
Right.
And so again, I'm committed, even when things start to get, even maybe especially when things start to be better, I stay on the path and continue.
Well, and that is a real pattern that couples can get into. We get some desperation, we get some movement, and then it falls off again. And then so we almost have to drum up desperation. It becomes a little bit of a pattern.
Right.
You know, it's hard. He doesn't say it, he quotes somebody, but Gabor Mate says in one of his books, and again, he's quoting somebody else, but it's hard to get enough of something that almost works.
Right, yes.
And that this almost works to get us to that next stage of recovery where it feels like, I don't know if this is good language for it, but it feels like he's driving his own school bus on his recovery journey versus the outside sort of pressure doing it on somewhat. But to your point, it is a good and necessary first stage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and the desperation does create this intense energy. You know, one of the images I use at the workshop is it's kind of like there's this planet of addiction, and the planet has a very strong gravitational pull. And so if you're going to get away from the planet of addiction, you have to have a certain amount of energy that will get you out of that atmosphere. And so that desperation can do that. You've mentioned something that I think is so significant that we talk a lot here at Faithful and True about, and that is the importance of an internal motivator, that I'm internally motivated to do this. I'm not doing it just to appease someone or to appear in a particular way or to get a good grade, but I'm really doing it because I want to be transformed. And again, that's the desire piece. So I think what can happen is early on, we are motivated externally. Somebody else thinks I should do this, or this is important to my wife, or my wife is hurt and angry, and I don't want her to be hurt and angry, and I'm going to do this to kind of appease her. Well, what we know is that's not a sustainable motivator. It's only when it becomes my desire. That's when I can do it for the long haul. And I think that probably the wives that you work with kind of intuitively sense, is he doing it for me or is he doing it for himself? And what's complicated is there's nothing wrong with wanting your family, your marriage to get better because you're doing recovery. That just cannot be the final motivation. I'm doing this to please somebody else because it's important to them.
Well, and I think a lot of wives, like you said, intuitively feel, I think he's just doing it for with external motivation. And it's worth just naming. It is a sensitive and scary time when we become aware that maybe we need to let off and let it be his own desire, versus needing to feel like responsible to continue to have external desperation. And being willing to sit back and take your hands off it. So that it could be that longer lasting sense that he wants it. He's going to drive it.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, one of the things that I see as a significant factor is that men established, I guess the best term is routines in their recovery, that they're going to keep doing this. And it's not just based upon their feeling. What's so interesting is desire is so important, but I cannot be completely dependent upon my desire because sometimes my desire will fade. You know, I often tell the story of when I was in my own recovery, I was a part of a therapy group. And the way the therapy group was set up is you paid for the group whether you went or not. And I can tell you, I complained about that like, you know, most people do. It's not fair. But the reality is the fact that I was paying for it was what got me in the car on a Tuesday night. Yes. And I never regretted going to group. I never thought, oh, that was a waste of time. I was always thankful that I went. But sometimes I just needed that external motivation. And in my particular case, you know, group was an hour away. It met Tuesday night starting at 9 p.m., went to 11 p.m. So it was basically from 8 to midnight was my group experience on a Tuesday night. And on a snowy Chicago night, I can tell you, I was thinking, I don't want to go, you know. But I would go, and I was so thankful that I had this external motivator. But the key was the external motivator couldn't be based upon a relationship. Maybe it was based on my relationship with money, but it wasn't based upon Beth being angry at me or having a reaction to me if I didn't go. It was still my internal motivation with some external consequences that I used to leverage it. So whatever system works, whatever a man can do that kind of gets him over that hump when maybe the desire has faded a little bit, and you find desire. Maybe I'm not really thrilled about recovery right now, but it will be good for me just to be with a group of men that know me. Or maybe I'm not really motivated to, do one of the practices I've established in my recovery, but I can do it because I do like that sense of satisfaction.
Yeah.
A while back, I started running, and I can tell you, occasionally I look forward to running, but so rare. But what I do like is that sense of satisfaction when I've done it. And sometimes that back-end satisfaction is enough to get a guy to group, to reach out to somebody, to stay invested in some way. And so I think that's part of that dance that we do in recovery, that I'm internally motivated, but I have a variety of resources that I use when maybe that decreases a little bit, that keeps me engaged in the journey.
It's like that mix between being in touch with my feelings, my emotions, my current body states, but also being able to hold on to vision and set up behavioral structures for myself.
Right.
Yeah. Similar to how we move through, exercise, ADHD, all of those things. We still need to set up structures that help support us and having that vision that we're supporting ourselves.
Well, and I think that's one of the great benefits of group, is that the way most groups work, they meet at a particular time, at a particular place, whether online or in a location. So that consistency, this is what I do. It's that habit that we build in. In a perfect world, our cars would just know it's time to go to group if we drive there, or our computers flash onto our Zoom. Beth and I laugh sometimes about how well technology knows us. And at particular, like on Sunday morning, we get in the car and immediately it will give us a map to how to get to church. Well, that's kind of scary that our phone knows we go to church, but we do need that sense of, okay, this is what we do. This is set up for us, that I can regularly go to this place. And whatever I can get out of this experience, I'm going to use it to support my recovery. And that brings to something else I think is significant. So I'm invested in these things, I'm committed to these things, and I am constantly trying to maximize the resources that I have. I'm leveraging them. It's not enough just to go to group. It's how do I want to use group, or what do I need from group? One of the things I loved about the group that I went to is every week we had to identify how we wanted to use the group, or what we needed from the group that night. And it just got me in a habit of, okay, this is a resource, this is a tool. How am I going to use this tool? If I'm going to a therapist, even now as I meet with my therapist, I have a sense of, this is what I want to process, or this is what I want to talk. I come with this sense. Now, I'm also open to how the therapist guides and leads our conversations and the experiences, but I have a sense. And every once in a while, I have an appointment. I don't have a clear thing, but every single time we find something that is helpful for me to name and process. So it's how am I going to maximize, steward, leverage these resources that I have that are going to propel me forward? And my guess for some wives, that's an awareness that they have. Yeah, he's going to group, but I'm not sure what he does at group, or how he's using group, or how group is making a difference in his life.
Right.
Again, the group that I went to, the premise was you come to group to practice so that your life outside of group is different.
Right.
So that was always in the front of our mind. Okay, I'm practicing having a difficult conversation with one of my group members so that I can have a difficult conversation with somebody outside of group. I practice being vulnerable in group so I can be vulnerable outside of. So it becomes the practice for me to live the rest of my life.
Yeah.
So there is this thing I'm doing with group. I often say with recovery, attendance is not enough. You have to get something out of the experience and want something out of the experience.
Well, and come with that intentional drive. It's partly why, I do find group so powerful. And I encourage all my group members also to come with a topic, because it means I'm practicing being reflective in my own life, intentional in my own life, versus working on autopilot.
Yeah.
And so back to that question though. So, because I think sometimes with the wives, they have that sense that I'm like, how come some husbands make it and some don't? That there's probably that question running underneath for them. Like, okay, but really, how can I make him want it? Yeah. And it's a hard spot.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that's true, it's difficult to get someone to desire something that they don't.
Yeah.
We can encourage them, we can support them, but the uniqueness of desire, it is a fire that comes from within us that we have to nurture and grow.
Yeah.
And I often use the image of a fire, and it's like if you put logs on the fire, then the fire is going to grow. And so the strategic person removes logs from the fire they want to diminish, and they put logs on the fire that they want to increase. Well, we want the desire for recovery to increase. And so that is something that the man has to do. I think what's just true in what we teach is a wife observes and then needs to make decisions based upon what she's observing. And maybe everything in her wants to motivate, maybe even at times manipulate. But the reality is this is more about his desire. And one of the ways I think we do nurture desire is, and I talk about this at the workshop, you get a glimpse of transformation.
Yeah.
You just get a taste of it. You live a day without afraid that someone's going to find out a secret, because there are no secrets. You experience what it's like to show up and have a difficult conversation and recognize you actually feel closer to the person afterwards. You are present with your emotions, and you're connected to someone in your community or your family that you love, and you go, wow, this is a way of living that I want. And the more I can contrast the addiction with the transformation and get a glimpse of that, and the earlier I can do that too. And that's one of the things the men in my groups know. I use the phrase regularly. That's an indication that your recovery is working. That's an indication your recovery is working. Because without that, sometimes we miss it. But when I show up and have a difficult conversation with someone that typically I would have avoided, that's an indication my recovery is working.
Yeah.
You know, if I can allow myself to feel grief and sadness and maybe tear up at something that my child did that I was so proud of, that's an indication that my recovery is working.
Yeah.
If I'm in a very typical situation where historically I would be tempted and I didn't even have a thought of my acting out, that's an indication my recovery is working. And so to me, that really is what nurtures that greater desire. And the more I can see that, the more I can experience that, the more I will then desire it, which then will become the motivation that keeps me engaged in recovery. And then one thing I want to say, there is this absolute need for resilience.
Yeah.
That this is a long journey. This is a windy path. And I use the image of backpacking, and sometimes the path is well marked, sometimes it's flat terrain, sometimes it is rocky and up steep inclines, sometimes it's rocky and down steep inclines. But the idea is I'm committed, whatever the path is in front of me, I'm going to do it. And one of my regular prayers for men is that they will have clarity about whatever their next right step is, and they will have the courage and the capacity to choose it. That's what it is. It's literally that one day at a time, one step at a time. And when we're willing to do that, some of these things that I've talked about, those things will be nurtured. The motivation that will come from that desire, the willingness to do some of the groundwork, the looking and living in truth, some of the stuff that's really challenging early on, I'm committed to doing that.
And the little experiences of new things, that all keeps us going.
And now you have a podcast that you can send your group members to hear and experience this very beneficial conversation. Okay? And now that Greg has eaten up all of my time, in which I would normally tell you about if this message has reached you and has opened your eyes to some of the guidance and direction that we provide here at Faithful and True, we invite you to our website, faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many resources, many of them free, as well as all of the information and online registration for our Men's Journey Workshop, which we offer every month, as Greg made several references to it. We do the men's workshop every month, and then we do the workshop for the spouses, for the women. And we do that about 3 or 4 times a year. And then we also have 2 workshops for couples. So check that all out at faithfulandtrue.com. We hope that that will be of great benefit to you. So Rebecca Dekkers, thank you so much for joining us again.
You're welcome.
It's always great to have you here. In fact, we just had you write the March feature article for the newsletter, and we'd like to do a podcast where you can tell us all about the equine therapy that is very soon to be an offering here at Faithful and True.
Sounds good.
So until the next time, we thank you for joining us. We thank Kayla for her production and engineering talents. And we hope that this coming week will be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.